All right, welcome back. What I'm going to try to do is to cover Unit 12, the ecology section. This section is not that long. I had to chop it down a little bit to take in consideration being online. So I added a few other things that balance that out to give you the, I think, an overall good experience about this topic. This is, in this particular area, vocabulary is really, really important. If you see that there's a series of words that associate with ecology that are unique to ecology: mutualism, commensalism, competition, parasitism, predation, herbivory. All of these types of terms have meanings, and they're defined in the text below. And so I would focus on that to help prep for the lab practical. Let's see here. So ecology is the study of interactions of living organisms, those that are, of course, interactions that go in between living organisms. They can interact with biotic or living components of the ecosystem or non-living, abiotic. The interactions between the same species living in the same area is called population ecology. Community ecology is the study of organisms interacting with individuals of different species. So they typically ask that on a lab practical, so try to distinguish between the population ecology as the same species in the same area versus community ecologies is the study of organisms interacting with individuals of different species. The study of organisms interacting with abiotic or without life environment is called ecosystem ecology, and that's, of course, the interaction with that environment. So population ecology studies population size, growth, density, distribution, life history patterns, and all of these things are sort of placed together as they interact. The community ecology talks about organisms that occupy a niche, and that's an area usually dictated by their food source, or being near water or something that they have to have for their resources in order to grow. The interactions between different species of organisms are often classified based on how the niches overlap. So we have competition when two species use the same resources, and so often one species will use another species as food source, resulting in herbivory or predation. And so the community ecology is interested in the health of the environment by recording the biodiversity of the environment. Usually the biodiversity is indicated of the number of species and the abundance of the species in a particular given area. And in order to determine the biodiversity, you must know the species richness in that particular area. And the richness is only one of the many factors that determine that biodiversity. Imagine two communities, A and B, having the same number of species, but community A, one species dominates and the other species are rare. Community B, all species are relatively abundant. The community you think has the higher biodiversity, which is more complex measurements include richness in species, but most, by that definition, it would be community B. Species evenness refers to the relative abundance of the different species in the area. So you could just determine the richness by representatives of each of those communities. Ecosystems are a complex, delicate balance. Ecologists are interested in the overall health and welfare of the area. The health of an environment not only influences the organism, but impacts of the humans that may be sharing the same region. Destruction of trees due to introduction of insects may have a detrimental impact on the economics of the area, which is a human trait. If the trees are dead, then tourism will decrease and these sorts of things. So it has an economic balance to all of these sorts of things. So anywhere denoted in this particular manual, this is in Word format, so in order to get your feedback, anywhere there's red, you just comment. You can just type right in there, being Word document, and you can define it in these particular terms, and you're feel free to Google if you want. The idea is I want you to find some examples of each of these and put that in the lab manual. Just save the lab manual. You can put your initials after it or whatever in the file name, and just email it to me so I can look at it. What's nice about that is you get to keep your copy with the answers, so you can study and use that for your lab practical that'll be coming up. Different species with ecosystems have overlapping niches, and because these organisms use the same resources, they must compete. So these species that directly compete tend to dominate. The ones that out-compete or dominate species, and the other ones may go extinct, and we call this competitive exclusion. And it's just because, well, they basically starve them to death, so they can't feed on what they normally feed on. Another type of interaction, the organisms that consume each other. Herbivores are organisms that eat autotrophs, those that generate their own sorts of food for various things. Predators are heterotrophs that kill and consume other organisms called the prey. So based on competitive exclusion, go ahead and depict one in practice, species A and B, and if you introduce a predator, predict what might happen in giving the time. And again, you just sort of make these scenarios as you go along, and then answer the questions that are listed in the red. Again, this is pretty straightforward. The next is food web. Food webs are really quite easy. A trophic level is one that, you have your primary, your producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. And the best way to look at that is, this is your primary producer. It's a tree which obviously gets its energy and support from sunlight. So it is a primary producer, and these of course support the primary consumers, which I denoted here with the green arrows. And then your secondary consumers will be those that spin off from that, and I put some of those in red. So this would be a secondary here, a secondary consumer of the rabbit, and this bird of prey may be a secondary consumer of the bird from the source. So the terminology, at least in terms of the primary, secondary, tertiary, are ones that are the farthest or become first, second, or third from the primary producer, which is in this case the tree. So create your own food web. Just you can draw it, or and you can take a picture of that, and they give you some organisms to place into that in that web. Critical thinking questions, again in red, if you could answer those. Now the other is the Earth's carrying capacity. Read through this material. It talks about, gives you some background. I do want to point out, if you look on this chart, we have the year down. We have, let's go ahead and explain, X and Y axis, and the X axis is the one at the bottom. We typically use the year for that, and then in the Y direction we'll put the time in years, and is equally tick marked. And usually these charts are quite straightforward to look at and to interpret, so it's critical. scientific critical thinking and that sort of thing, adding the numbers to this relationship. And you can see a breakdown of the countries and the percentages of those that make up that overall population. So what I wanted you to do is to get some experience in the plotting. And again, this may require you to take a picture, but down on the x-axis down here, which goes this way, you can put like we had in this particular example here, the year, and then the population along this axis over here in millions, and then plot this data that you see in this population chart, and put a title at the top, and you have that. So I would just save the document with all the other responses and just take a few image pictures with your phone or something, and just include that in the email. Pretty straightforward. The analysis of what you've plotted, you can add to the Word document here and send that as an email. I appreciate you putting up with this online stuff. I'm working on ways to do this in a more effective way. But for right now, in the short time that we've had to do this, seems to be working. So if you bear with me on that, let's go ahead and read through the rest of this and answer those few questions. Now, the things that I deleted out of there, obviously we can't do online, but as a balance to that, I have this is called a case study. Case studies, I think you've had one in class already. We had done one, and read through the background, and this is about ecology, and it's a good example because it's one of the largest communities on the world. About 1.7 billion people live in China, and they've gotten a lot of news lately for the outbreak and the like, but of course they have to have energy resources, and this is what this is about: hydroelectric dams and the impact to the ecology. And so what I wanted you to do is to analyze and go through this, reading about it. And China is not unique to this. We also go through these sorts of resources, and it's good to be aware of what the impact of using these different types to create energies. The assignment, once you've finished reading and sort of going through this case study, is all I want you to do is, after you've looked at the cost, the impact, and social impacts, as the article talks about, you can work as a group using Microsoft Teams, or as an individual. Prepare a one-page position statement on what you think about the construction of that dam, and why you think it's important or not important. And again, just write that up as a separate one-pager and just send that to me by email. And there's some tips and some ideas about what to add into the assignment. And so that's what this case study is about. And again, this is to compensate or to balance some of the things I had to we could not do because we're online. But it's a good study. If you could look at that, and the laboratory material, which is in a Word document, as you go through, just find the areas that are in red and respond. Anything that you've done drawings and things, you could take pictures of that and just add those into the email, and you'll be all set. That's this lab. And again, I'm not worried too much about timing. Just the best efforts so you can get this to me. I know this is a very odd time, but this is an interesting on ecology. At least I try to add components to it that might spark some interest for you. Other than that, we got one more section to go that's on microorganisms, and we'll cover that next week. And then we'll do a review for the lab practical, and then I've sent around a practice exam. If it works the way I'm hoping, that'll be the forum on which I will deliver the lab practical. You'll have a certain amount of time to do it, to get one shot at it as you go through it. Obviously, you have to complete it. And I may have it as a group sort of taking it in sections, and I just monitor the exam taking process using Zoom, and so that I can see everyone, and that makes it straightforward, and that satisfies the university, I believe, the best that I can anyhow. So at least that's the plan. We'll see how that goes. Get this to me when you can, and it's a pretty straightforward lab. I hope this is good for you.